Claypool. Officer Claypool is from Community Affairs, and Detective Chancellor is from Crimes Against Persons. So it does a wide range of helping people. What'd you say, hugs and...
I do high fives and hugs.
High fives and
yeah, that's it.
I love it.
That's it.
I love it.
Well, thank you guys for being here.
Hey, thank you very much.
Yay.
So, she said there's a wide range between Chancellor and I. It's the truth. Detective Chancellor does real police work, and I do not. So, we probably have about the same amount of experience, probably about 10 years. But we took different routes. He does more of the investigating, kind of the high-profile crimes, and I really do the exact opposite. If it's a party or it's fun, like I said, high fives, hugs, community policing, that's what I do. But we thought there's two different components here, so we would tag team on it. Tim's going to take the lead, and we want to follow up with some community policing side of it. And at the very end, we actually left 20 minutes, 25 minutes for questions and answers, because the best thing that we can get is feedback from you guys if we missed something or there's something that we didn't cover that you want us to talk about. So with that, we'll turn it over to Chancellor and I'll continue at the very end. Right?
So let me give you just kind of an overview of the way the presentation is set up. We're going to start out with what is an emergency action plan. If you've ever worked for a place that didn't have one, or if you worked for a place that did have one, and it was like, yeah, it was kind of, they just told us to go hide in this room or whatever. You know, what is it that a plan is? What are the components? What makes it effective? How do you practice that? What should the plan encompass? We're also going to talk a little bit about workplace violence. We're going to touch on that. We're going to talk about active killer, active shooter. If you're watching the news at all, that is generally the #1 topic that pops out, whether it's a school or a church or a place of business. But that is the one that we routinely get asked about. We're going to show a video, and we're going to talk about some of the things that the video talks about. And then we're just going to open it up to, y'all know your place of business. You know the issues where you have concerns, where you have issues, where you have questions. And then we're going to give you some feedback on what we've seen in other places that was effective. Maybe some things that weren't as effective. I'm not going to say they didn't work, because they just weren't as effective. And you know, just an opportunity to ask questions. We're very informal, so if we're going through something and you've got a question, just ask. We may cover it later. It may be something that I didn't think of. Because the beginning of this is just kind of general knowledge and information, and then we'll get into some of the more specific stuff. So just kind of give you an idea. So emergency action plan is actually required. It's legislated through OSHA that you have one. And it says if your company has more than 10 employees, that you're actually required to have that emergency action plan in writing. It's got to be kept in the workplace and available to employees for review. But if you have fewer than 10 employees, then you can communicate that orally. I know it says you can talk about that orally. That does not work. So if you have less than 10 employees, you need to put it down on paper. And here's why. Do we have any attorneys, lawyers, risk management? Anybody like that? Okay. This stuff will get you sued, because there is not a deal where if you don't have it, you're not going to come get arrested and you're not going to get charged. But it's the kind of deal where, God forbid, something happens, and it will. It may not be a major thing, but it could be relatively minor. Something happens, somebody gets hurt, or you know, maybe it's just a misunderstanding, or a process doesn't get carried out that could have been covered in an emergency action plan, and then they find out that you never had it. And then this is where the attorneys and the lawyers come around the corner with the big briefcases, and this is where you end up paying for it. So it's kind of one of those things where you should have it, it's written on the book somewhere, nobody's going to make you have it, but you can pay later or you can pay now. And so always just kind of throw that out there. When we, and as a police department several years ago, we looked at several different schemes as far as, well, not schemes, but paradigms, how to evaluate our training and where to put the emphasis. And so we adopted this scale, which is actually not anything to do with law enforcement. This actually has to do with finances, and this is from the finance world. And it breaks everything down into 4 different categories of low frequency, low severity, high frequency, low severity, low frequency, high severity, and high frequency, high severity. And we'll talk about what these are. So low frequency, low severity are risks that occur very infrequently and have only a slight or marginal impact upon their occurrence. So if you were a retail business, this is employees stealing pens and pencils. Is it going to break the bank? Absolutely not. Does it happen? All the time. Have we all done it? Probably at one point or another. I've got a stack of pens on my desk at home that all belong to work, that they go in my pocket and I'm working and I get home and they're still there. Or they're in the laundry after all my clothes get done and then I've run several pairs of pants because I took some pens home. So not a big deal. You know, do you have to account for this stuff? Yes, you do, but it's not that big of a problem. High frequency, low severity are risks that occur frequently but still have only a slight or marginal impact upon their occurrence. If you're Walmart, these are shoplifters. You know, picking up a CD or a video game, again, it's not going to change the bottom line. Is it something that needs to be addressed? Absolutely, because you will have a problem. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge deal. Low frequency, high severity. These are risks that occur, that may not occur often, but when they do occur, the consequences are absolutely devastating. And that could be a fire, it could be a natural disaster, it could be an active shooter, active killer. You pray that this stuff doesn't ever happen, but you prepare for it, and then if it doesn't, good deal, and if it does, then hopefully your EAP covers it. So the high frequency, high severity, and I want y'all to give me an example, are those risks that are almost certain to occur and will likely be incapacitating upon their occurrence. So what do you think from your standpoint?
If Diane left.
Yep.
So I'll give you a couple from our side. Man with a gun calls. We go to those every day. And you wouldn't think so. But it is not unusual to get a call. And the gun may be a cell phone. It may be a stick of wood. There's no telling what it is. But we get those probably 1 or 2 times a day. Road rage. And so it could be the real thing. And if it is, it could be bad. But it's the way it actually plays out is it's low frequency and it's a high risk. But as we get the calls every day, I would put it in that category. So the financial system says when you take these, you can basically respond to them in 4 different ways. You can accept the risk as a cost of doing business and decide to retain or budget for that risk. That is, if you spend any time with us up at work, this is our catchphrase. You know what? You get into a fight, you tear up a uniform, a car gets damaged. I mean, it's cost of doing business. You know, we're not a money-making entity, and we just have to budget for that. Sometimes police work's ugly. Sometimes people get hurt, people get injured, you go to the hospital. It's going to happen. Do we stop doing what we do because of that? No, hell no. You can't do that. So we budget for it, and it's the cost of doing business. 2, retain or budget for that cost of risk, but take steps to reduce and avoid the risk. 3, transfer the cost associated with the risk to third parties, such as insurance. Or 4, avoid the risk altogether by fundamentally changing some aspects of the business. Now, what I would tell you is that an EAP is going to do all 4 of these things. You don't just pick one and say, this is going to be the answer for it all, but you have to incorporate different aspects of it. And if you do that, then you would have a successful emergency action plan. So, do we have any HR people in here? Okay. So, when you create an EAP, you need input from HR, from training, from facility owners and operators, from a property manager, and then it helps sometimes if you can get some feedback from your local law enforcement agency, just because when the wheels do come off the bus, who's going to end up showing up? Hopefully it's us. Hopefully it's in a timely manner, which fortunately you're in this city and our response time is pretty timely. But if everybody's on the same page, it makes dealing with the emergency a lot easier. So, as I understand it, Children at Heart or Starry or the Children's Home don't own this property, correct?
There's a property holding company that of our family ministries that holds the property.
Okay. But it's not like a third party that y'all lease from?
No.
Okay. So some of this is probably not going to be applicable to your entity or your organization. but it is also, I mean, it's stuff to think
Well,
about.
we have satellite
Yeah.
offices that do
Okay.
this property.
It's almost like a storefront, sort of, where you would have.
It's like an office building.
Okay.
But yeah, it's owned by somebody.
Well, then, in that case, this would apply. It's owned by somebody, it's not us.
Yeah.
We lease.
Thank you.
So some of this is mandated by OSHA. Other parts of this is just a good idea. It's a preferred method for reporting fires and other emergencies, an evacuation policy and procedure, emergency escape procedures and route assignments, floor plans, safe areas, contact information for and responsibilities of individuals to be contacted under the EAP, information concerning local area hospitals, and an emergency notification system to alert various parties of an emergency, to include individuals at remote locations, how do you contact your area law enforcement, and then also if you were to have like a mass casualty type deal, how would you notify the hospital? That's generally taken care of by EMS and 911 if something were to happen, and we are going to need a lot of EMS. We generally relay that information through them, but it's some things to think about in some of your more remote areas. You may not have that option, and the entity or the organization, the burden may be on them to make that notification to the hospital of, hey, we're sending you 10 instead of 1. And with smaller medical facilities, that can kind of put them in a spin because they're just not equipped to handle that amount of people. So the reason this is underlined is you might see this later. The most effective way to train your staff to respond to high-risk incidents is to conduct training exercises. So one of the things that we do at our department, I came from another agency before, that we were absolutely terrible at this, was training. I mean, I spent about 6 years at another law enforcement agency that was up in the Dallas area, and I did more training the first 2 months I was here than I did in the previous 6 years at that place. So it's a big emphasis for us. We spend a lot of money doing it, but we also understand that because of some officer-involved shootings we've been involved in, some high-risk incidents, that you're either going to write that check now or you're going to write it later. And so it's better to get that training on the front end so that you're able to more effectively deal with those situations, because they're going to happen. So you can either be prepared or you can wing it, and sometimes you're okay, but the majority of the time it's better to have that training in place. So one of the things that we have done the last few years, and we are in a transition period, is that we go to Fort Hood twice a year, and it's for 1 week. And every officer is assigned to go on a day, and you go on your day off if you're on patrol. And if you're an office monkey like myself, then you just scratch out one day and you just go. And we do full scenario-based training, force on force, little paint bullets, and they put you in scenarios, and if you do poorly, you get shot. And then you fight through it, and then you resolve the situation. And it is amazing how we will go to Fort Hood, and we will have a scenario, and somebody will make some comment like, that would never happen. And then in 6 months, we end up dealing with that out here on the street. We had a deal where last year, I believe it was, large scenario scaled, it was about 10 acres was the entire play area, because it's an urban assault site. It's basically a small city that we inhabit for a week, and we just run bank robberies, car chases, all kinds of stuff. In that scenario, we had two shootings going on at the same time. That's Brown. You're never going to have 2 shootings going on at the same time. Yeah. 3 months later, we had 2 shootings happen at the same time. And so the sergeants were forced to not only address that issue, but also allocate manpower and get those scenes under control, make sure that you got investigators on site, get the wounded taken care of, investigate properly before the crime scene gets turned to crap because of the evidence eradication team, the fire department and EMS. They go in there and they do great stuff, but then all of our evidence is just gone. So don't underestimate the importance of doing these training scenarios or training exercises, because the other thing that will allow you to do is see where, man, this was a great plan on paper, and then when we actually tried to put it into practice, it was terrible. It was absolutely bunk. So, and you can find that out in some of your training exercises, that this just did not. We have to change this. You can also incorporate recognizing the sound of gunshots, reacting quickly, evacuating the area, hiding out, acting against the killer as a last resort, calling 911. So when you listen, y'all ever watch those drama shows like the first 48, 48 hours, and they played that 911 tape, and you're watching it, and you're listening. Those stupid people. Why didn't they just say this? Why didn't they say that? Right? Well, there's actually information, like useful information, that is helpful to give out on 911 that we don't seem like we ever get. It's like when we first started getting cell phones trying to call 911, and folks who didn't practice hitting the send button couldn't figure out why they couldn't call 911. Y'all may be too young for that.
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
Okay, so when we had these telephones that had cords on them, you could just pick them up and call 911, and it went straight through. So on cell phones, you had to start hitting send. So, or like when you were teaching kids how to call 911 and they were teaching 911, and so they were looking on the dial and they didn't see the 11, so they didn't know how to call 911. I mean, I'm being straight serious. This was an issue in the training. Oh, well, we can't teach people 911. It's not 911, it's 911. Things like that. So, reacting when law enforcement arrives, that's a huge deal. And we'll talk about that. And adopting a survival mindset during times of crisis. We're going to talk about that as well. So, your HR department and facility managers should engage in planning for emergency situations, including an active killer scenario. Planning for emergency situations will help to mitigate the likelihood of an incident by establishing the mechanisms described below. So, as HR, if we had HR people here, then you would talk about doing effective employee screening. If they are crazy when you are going to hire them, guess what? They are still going to be crazy in 6 months, and they're probably going to get worse. There are people that we work with, not necessarily at this department, but when I see them, I make sure and tell them hi. I'm very nice to those people, right, JoJo? Because if they ever twist off and come to work, I want them pointing at somebody else so that I've got a shot of getting home because Timmy was nice to you. That guy was not nice to you, right? So, create a system for reporting signs of potentially violent behavior, making counseling services available to employees, developing an EAP which includes policies and procedures for dealing with active killer situations, as well as after-action planning. And you can substitute that to an irate parent in the lobby, a fire on property, a hazmat situation. You know, this is active killer, active shooter, just because that's the thing that pops into everybody's mind. But y'all are 1 block from 35. If we had a tanker trailer that turned over on 35 that was full of hazardous materials, depending on the way the wind is blowing, y'all might be in the area that we would have to evacuate. So how do you do that? Where do you go? How do you account for your personnel and your clients and your customers? How do you deal with your confidential documents that are in the office? We've had to change our policy on that because we used to just leave stuff out on our desks. Yeah, we can't do that anymore. We're supposed to lock that stuff up. As Mary was talking about, you got to lock it up. Just because now our building is more open than it has ever been, whether that's good or bad, not to debate, but we have more people coming through, and our personal or our ongoing investigations have personal information. And so, like in our division, on one side of my desk, I could have an indecency with a child, and on the other side, I may have a baby death. Both of those, I don't need people who don't need knowledge of this investigation reading through my stuff. So it's incumbent upon me to make sure that I secure that stuff. So just some thoughts about, you know, just something as simple as a hazmat deal that you have absolutely no control over. Facility manager responsibilities, access controls, keys, security system, passcodes. We use at our building these cards. They seem to be a lot easier. It's a pain in the tail when they stop working. Because doors lock, you get locked into the holding area. You wonder if you've been fired because you can't, they won't let you out. But you don't have to carry a set of keys, and then you just walk by and scan it, it opens right up. And there are different levels of access for different employees. So that's a tool. Institute or distribute critical items to appropriate managers, employees, including floor plans, keys, telephone numbers, personnel list, coordinate with the facility security department to ensure the physical security of the location. That's assuming that you have security personnel. For most entities and organizations, you are the security personnel. So if you see something, it's incumbent upon you to communicate that to somebody. Who? I don't know. If you have an EAP, it may give you an idea. Is this something where we need to call a supervisor or a manager? Or is this something that's non-emergency police worthy? Or is this 911 worthy? Crisis kits, removable floor plans near entrances and exits for emergency responders, and activate the emergency notification system when an emergency situation occurs. We had the opportunity, it was last week, all regions drill, wasn't that? We did a full-scale emergency drill with other agencies, fire, EMS, hazmat, police department, sheriff's office. Monday was up at Eastview High School. Wednesday was in Hutto. I didn't go to that one. Was that at a high school?
Yeah, we're off at Toll Road. Eastview? No. Eastview High School?
That was Monday, and then Wednesday we were in Hutto. And then
Farley Middle School.
Farley Middle School. Okay, and then Friday we were at ACC. You ever been to ACC? The one here?
Mm-hmm.
So I worked south when I was in patrol. I've only been in that building maybe once in the last 6 years. The 3000 building was where we were at. 3 stories. I would have to estimate probably 5,000 square feet. And we had an active shooter in that building, and first responders had to go in and then had to find him. And so having maps as soon as you walked in, it kind of told you the layout of the building was extremely helpful in trying to figure out where are we going so that you don't make a right-hand turn, open the door, and you go immediately into a closet. So, and it took talking to the SWAT guys, because we ended up incorporating them into this scenario because it was a hostage situation, and then the building collapsed, and then there were cats and dogs, and then fire from heaven, and it was all, I mean, every time you turned around, it was bad. And they ended up having to do this extraction, and they said to search that building effectively in a timely manner, it would have taken 3 teams of about 15 members each team. So we're talking 45 folks. We don't have that kind of time. So having floor plans next to entrance and exit points, if you can, extremely helpful. Now, I had an opportunity a couple weeks ago to walk that building. Probably don't need a floor plan if we were to show up. It's relatively small. It would be nice to know that, you know, there's some offices on this side and offices on this side, and there's a conference room in the back. So, but generally when we show up and we do a building clearing that's pretty quick, that's not available, so you just kind of have to wing it. But if you have a large building. Employees and customers are likely to follow the lead of managers during an emergency situation. So people are sheep. It's not a bad thing, but they are. And so if everybody stands around and is not sure what to do, everyone will generally stand around unless you have an alpha person in the group that says, everybody follow me, I know the way. And then folks will follow you. So something to think about, especially with the clients that you have, who may already be dealing with something and may not be paying attention, that it may be incumbent upon you as the employee or manager to lead the way if there's an evacuation out of your building. So, after a high-risk incident has been resolved and is no longer active, HR and management should engage in post-assessments activities, including you want to account for everybody that's at your building, and you want to have a designated assembly point. So, at this point, if there was an emergency over at that building and y'all had to evacuate, is there an assigned area that everybody would meet up?
There is, but probably not many people are aware of what it is.
Okay. So, so there you can identify an area that probably needs to be communicated. I would tell you, depending on the situation, you might want to change your rally point, and that's what we call it. If it is a smoke in the building, possibly a fire, you probably don't have to be that far away. I would not do it in the back, because when I walked it the other day, I noticed it looked like y'all had a fence all the way around. And if for some reason you all met up in the back area and then the building became fully engulfed and it looked like the fire department was only going to be able to save the slab, then you might be there for a while. And so you would either need to climb fences or cut that lock and then end up going over there. I think there's a daycare if you keep going to the west. So But if you have somebody that is in your building like an active shooter, that would absolutely not be a good place to be because you want to be out of eyesight. And you want to think about being behind something that may stop bullets. And being in that backyard is probably not going to be the best place. And you want to be out of sight. So something to think about as far as an assembly point. You may want to have your, okay, things, we're having to leave the building point, and then, oh, things are really, really bad. We need to get out of here now and go very, very far away assembly point, which may be goodwill. Just kind of throwing that out. Making sure that you accommodate your emergency action plan for your ADA personnel. So not just coworkers and employees, but also your clients. And it's something that we all know, we think about it, we're required to have it by the building, but it is something that generally gets left out when we do our plan. So maybe a current or former employee or an acquaintance of a current or former employee. Intuitive managers and coworkers may notice characteristics of potentially violent behavior in an employee. You want to alert your HR department if you think that they're potentially going to exhibit violent behavior. So the other key to this is some of your coworkers, and not pointing out anybody in particular because I don't know any of you, but some of you have some baggage. Okay, it's normal, right? You got crazy boyfriends, crazy girlfriends, whatever the case may be, and sometimes those relationships go bad, and sometimes they go bad at your workplace because you're not returning phone calls, you're not answering the door when they come by, but you know where they know you're going to be? At work. So what do? They show up at work and then they cause a scene and then there's a disturbance, somebody ends up calling 911 and then we show up. Well, between that time of when the disturbance happens and the time that we show up, hopefully it's just verbal, but it doesn't have to be an employee. It can be some of the baggage in your personal life that ends up making it to work. So just kind of some things to think about in your EAP as far as, you know, there's crazy people out there. And it's people other than us. So this is not necessarily an all-inclusive list, but some of the things is, you know, you're interacting with some of your fellow employees, or maybe some folks out there that you might want to think about. Depression, withdrawal, if somebody begins to slip on their personal hygiene, maybe the water's turned off, they didn't pay the bill, maybe they're going through something. They become noticeably unstable, emotional responses are changing, severe mood swings. Talk of previous incidents of violence. Talks about committing violence to other people. Conversations about firearms. Now that's regionally sensitive down here. I think, you know, I would expect most of y'all to have a gun. May not expect you to have it at work, but just because somebody talks about a gun doesn't necessarily mean they're going to use it. So I want to kind of think about that one. Critical incident debriefs, Mary's already talked about that, so we're going to kind of blow through it. They're extremely important. They're important for us, important for the first responders. We had a baby death back in June. And we're still working, and it was probably one of the more productive critical incident debriefs that I've been to. So we had a lot of first responders that went there, had a lot of the officers that were there that had kids about the same age. And so, and that one was a rough one. And so it kind of helped everybody process it and deal with it. But you can't make it mandatory, but, and I'm a firm believer in those. I think they're very effective. So we're going to get into active shooter, active killer. Don't take this to mean that this is the only thing that we're talking about. There are many aspects that involve dealing with these type of scenarios that are also applicable in disturbances in the lobby, hazmat situations on 35. You're minding your own business, the cops are chasing somebody, he bails out of a car in your front part of the building, and then he just strolls up into your lobby type deal. And it's happened before. And so, you know, just because we're talking about this, kind of as you're thinking and if you're taking notes, you know, kind of think about, okay, well, that might be something we want to include, maybe not necessarily for this, although it is applicable, but for some other situations. Just looking at some snapshots, and you may not be able to read this, it's kind of tiny print, but between 2000 and 2013, there were 160 incidents that occurred, which averaged 11.4 events annually. There were 1,043 casualties. The top number, 486, is the number killed. 557 is the number of casualties. The bar graph gives you an idea of the escalation. And then of those incidents, there were only 6 of them where the female was the perpetrator. So it's typically a male